Welcome to our deep dive today.
We're going to be taking a closer look at John von Neumann,
Okay.
a name you might not recognize right off the bat, but trust me, you should.
This guy was a total rock star in like every field you can imagine.
Yeah.
Math, physics, economics, computer science.
It's kind of ridiculous.
I mean, talk about an overachiever, right?
Yeah, seriously.
So today, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to unearth not just what this guy accomplished, but how it's still shaping your life today.
You know, that's what makes von Neumann so fascinating.
Right.
His work is everywhere, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. Like, did you know he was obsessed with Bach's Art of the Fugue as a kid?
I've heard that.
Turns out, it kind of foreshadowed how he designed computer architecture later on.
That's wild.
Crazy, right? Or how his work helped nations, not blow each other up during the Cold War.
Seriously, high stakes.
High stakes indeed.
All right, let's rewind to the beginning.
Okay.
Von Neumann's story starts in Budapest at the turn of the 20th century.
Picture a city just brimming with different cultures and ideas, and little von Neumann soaking it all in.
His family was like a mini United Nations.
Oh, yeah.
They spoke like a million languages.
Wow.
There's even this story about him cracking jokes in ancient Greek.
No way.
At 6 years old.
6 years old.
I mean...
I was still trying to figure out how to tie my shoes at that age.
Right. Unbelievable.
That kind of environment, it had to have shaped his thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's no surprise he was a math whiz from young age.
Eventually, he ends up studying in Germany, which was the place for math at the time.
Right. Specifically, the University of Göttingen.
Their whole thing was pure math.
So like geometry, logic, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Elegant proofs, not messy equations.
Oh, there's jam.
So kind of like a mathematical symphony.
You could say that.
More about the beauty of the proof than the practicality of it.
Yeah, very much so.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
This pure approach, it was starting to clash with a new, more analytical style.
Using, like, algebra and equations.
Exactly.
So there's this tension brewing.
Big time.
And guess who's right in the middle of this math showdown?
Let me guess.
John von Neumann.
Of course.
Okay, so how does this whole pure versus applied math battle play out in his work?
Well, things take a dramatic turn when the Nazis rise to power in Europe.
Right.
Von Neumann, being Jewish, had to flee.
Yeah.
He ends up in the U.S., and that move really shifted his focus.
From pure math
to
the applied stuff.
Wow, it's like his life mirrored the shift happening in math itself.
It's true.
And America was ready for him, right?
Oh, absolutely.
This mathematician at Princeton, Oswald Veblen, he saw von Neumann's potential right away.
So he gets him a job at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Yeah, pretty much a mathematical dream team.
I bet.
Okay, before we dive into von Neumann's biggest hits, we got to set the stage.
Right.
Imagine this. Mathematicians at the time are freaking out because the bedrock of their field...
Set theory.
Set theory, exactly.
Total meltdown.
It's like finding out the rules of your favorite game are completely broken.
That's a good analogy.
The culprit. Russell's paradox.
Ah, yes, Russell's paradox.
That sounds intimidating.
It's a brain twister, for sure.
Break it down for me.
Okay, so imagine a barber.
Okay.
He shaves all men who don't shave themselves.
All right. Simple enough.
Right. But now ask yourself...
Does the barber shave himself?
Exactly.
If he does, he's breaking his own rule.
Right.
But if he doesn't, then he must shave himself according to his rule.
It's a total contradiction.
That's messing with my head.
It messed with everyone's heads back then.
So this paradox was a major problem for math, huh?
It threatened to unravel everything.
So how did von Neumann save the day?
He swoops in with this brilliant solution.
Okay.
He basically axiomatized set theory.
Meaning?
He created a new rule book to make sure those contradictions couldn't happen.
So no more paradoxes.
Well, fewer paradoxes.
He introduced this idea of classes.
Like supersized sets.
Basically, yeah.
To sidestep the whole paradox issue.
Pretty clever, right?
So he basically patched up the cracks in the foundation of math.
He did.
Kept it from crumbling.
He was a bit of a hero for that.
And this wasn't a one-time thing, right?
No, not at all.
He had already done something similar with quantum mechanics.
Yeah, he had a knack for building these strong logical foundations.
He liked figuring out the rules of the game, so to speak.
You could say that.
Okay, but just when things seemed to be settling down...
Oh.
Another bombshell.
What now?
Kurt Gödel.
Oh, boy.
And his infamous incompleteness theorems.
Yeah, Gödel's work was revolutionary.
He basically proved that even with the best rulebook, Math would always have some true statements that you just can't prove.
Wait, true but unprovable.
Yep, it's mind-bending.
How did von Neumann react to that?
He understood it immediately.
Honestly, he was a little bummed.
Why's that?
He was working on a similar problem himself.
Oh, no.
But instead of getting discouraged,
He was like, okay, math isn't perfect. It's more like a science, always changing based on what we discover.
so a little dose of humility for even the greatest mathematical minds.
Exactly.
It reminds me of that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Right.
Von Neumann embraced the limitations of math.
That's real intellectual honesty.
It is.
Always pushing boundaries, not getting stuck in rigid thinking.
He was all about progress.
Well, speaking of pushing boundaries.
Let's talk about something a little more down to earth.
Okay.
Von Neumann's work on game theory.
Game theory.
This is where he really shines, right?
He did some groundbreaking work there.
Developing a way to understand how we make decisions in competitive situations.
Exactly.
The mathematics of strategy.
That's a good way to put it.
So not just about, like, monopoly, right?
No, this is serious stuff.
This is about understanding real-world conflicts, collaborations.
Precisely.
Von Neumann was particularly interested in two-person zero-sum games.
Where one person's win is the other's loss.
Exactly.
High stakes.
He came up with something called the minimax theorem.
Okay. And what's that?
It's a way to figure out the best strategy in those win-lose situations.
So like a cheat sheet for decision-making.
You could think of it that way.
Give me a real-world example.
Okay, imagine two kids splitting a cake.
Okay.
One cuts, the other chooses.
Classic.
Right?
So what's the minimax strategy for the cutter?
Cut that cake as evenly as possible.
Makes sense.
Otherwise, the other kid's going to take the bigger piece.
Leaving them with the crumbs.
Exactly.
It's about being smart.
Anticipating what your opponent will do.
To get the best possible outcome for yourself.
That's brilliant.
It's a simple idea with huge implications.
I bet.
Von Neumann's work on game theory is used everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Economics, military strategy, even politics.
Really?
It's everywhere.
Speaking of military strategy,
Wasn't there a story about game theory being used in World War II?
there is.
Like a real-life game of Risk, but with much higher stakes.
Exactly. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea.
Okay, remind me what happened there.
The Allies had to stop the Japanese from delivering supplies.
Critical mission.
Very.
So the Allied commander, General Kenny, he used game theory.
To analyze the possible routes.
Yeah.
Figure out where the Japanese were most likely to go.
He basically used math to predict their move.
And set a trap.
Exactly.
So they won because of math.
It was a decisive victory.
That's amazing.
It shows how these abstract mathematical concepts can have real-world impact.
It's like math became a weapon in itself.
You could say that.
This leads us to another one of von Neumann's game-changing contributions.
Yes, she is.
Computers.
Yes, computers.
Remember, this is World War II.
Right.
There was a huge need for faster calculation.
Especially for things like ballistics.
Exactly.
Back in the day of those, room-sized computers with the glowing vacuum tubes.
The dinosaurs of computing.
Ancient ancestors of our laptops.
Exactly.
So von Neumann, he gets to see one of these early computers, the ENIAC, and he's instantly hooked.
But he also saw their limitations, right?
Oh, yeah.
They were slow. They couldn't store programs efficiently.
We're clunky.
So he was like, hold my beer, I can do better.
Something like that.
What was his breakthrough?
He came up with this idea of the stored program computer.
Where both the data and the instructions are stored in the same memory unit.
So instead of feeding instructions one by one...
It's like the computer has the entire cookbook in its memory.
I like that analogy.
Can access any recipe, anytime.
That's the idea.
That's a game changer.
It revolutionized computing.
This, along with his ideas about a central processing unit, memory, input-output systems.
All of that became known as the von Neumann architecture.
And guess what?
What?
It's still the foundation for pretty much every computer we use today.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Mind-blowing.
Every time I browse the internet...
I'm tapping into the brainchild of John von Neumann.
You got it.
His vision for computing was way ahead of its time.
That's for sure. Hold on, before we get too carried away, praising his computer genius...
We can't forget about the elephant in the room.
Which is?
The Manhattan Project.
Yes, the Manhattan Project.
A top-secret mission to build the atomic bomb.
Von Neumann, with his expertise in math and physics, he was a key player.
He was.
This is where his story gets complicated, right?
It does.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of John von Neumann.
Last time, we've kind of left off on a cliffhanger.
We did.
His involvement with the Manhattan Project.
Which, Raises some pretty tough questions.
It does.
His role in developing the atomic bomb.
And later, the hydrogen bomb.
It's complicated.
It is.
But it's important to remember the context where we're talking about the Cold War.
A time when the threat of nuclear war felt very real.
Absolutely.
So what was von Neumann's perspective on all this?
Well, he was definitely on the hawkish side. He believed that using these weapons might be inevitable.
Wait.
He even argued for preemptive strikes.
Against potential enemies.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
It is.
It's like his game theory brain was working overtime.
I think you're right.
Seeing the world as this high-stakes chess match.
He saw the U.S. and the Soviet Union locked in this strategic struggle.
And felt that America needed to maintain a strong position.
To prevent war.
To prevent war, yeah.
So even though his views might seem controversial today...
They weren't totally out there for the time?
No, not at all.
The Cold War was a scary time.
I can imagine.
His opinions reflected that fear?
It's a reminder that even brilliant minds...
can have viewpoints that
we might strongly disagree with today.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift gears for a minute to something a little less heavy.
I read that von Neumann's work on the hydrogen bomb
involved an insane amount of math.
Absolutely. We're talking calculations on a scale never seen before.
Seriously.
Remember, this is before modern computers.
Right.
So how did they do it?
I can't even imagine.
Rooms full of people, basically.
Doing what?
Crunching numbers by hand.
Like human calculators.
Pretty much.
Wow.
It was a massive effort.
I bet.
Von Neumann himself estimated that the sheer volume of calculations...
I'd have been more than all the math done in human history up to that point.
Seriously.
He did qualify that a little.
How?
He said if you include like every arithmetic problem ever done by every school kid...
It might not be that much more.
Okay, so maybe a slight exaggeration.
But still...
It was a ton of math.
A ton.
It makes you appreciate why he was so passionate about computers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Seeing those limits of human calculation firsthand.
It had to be a huge motivator.
He wasn't just interested in building faster machines.
He wanted to understand computation itself.
You got it.
How information is processed at a fundamental level.
That was his real goal.
And you know what else fascinated him?
What's that?
The connection between computers and the human brain.
Oh, yeah.
He even wrote a book about it.
What's it called?
The Computer and the Brain.
Pretty straightforward. He explores the similarities and differences between the two.
So did he find any real parallels?
He did.
Both computers and brains rely on a system of binary logic.
Ones and zeros.
Exactly.
Whether it's electrical signals and circuits or the firing of neurons.
So in a way, we're both running on the same kind of code.
Sort of, yeah.
But there are obviously big differences too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Computers excel at logical calculations.
But brains...
They're much more complex.
We have intuition, creativity, learning...
Things computers still struggle with.
Von Neumann believed figuring out these differences
was key to building more advanced artificial intelligence.
He was already thinking about AI back in the 1950s.
Wow, way ahead of his time.
He always was.
Okay, so computers and brains, check.
But there's another area he was exploring.
That sounds kind of sci-fi.
What's that?
Cellular automata.
Ah, yes. Cellular automata.
What are those?
Imagine a grid, like a chessboard.
Okay.
Each square has these simple rules.
Based on its neighbors.
Exactly.
And then you let those rules play out.
Over and over.
I've seen those computer simulations.
Where simple rules create these crazy complex patterns.
That's what we're talking about.
Von Neumann saw this as a way to model all sorts of complex systems.
Like what?
Crystal growth.
Even the evolution of life itself.
He was even working on a self-replicating machine, wasn't he?
He was.
Like a robot that could build copies of itself?
That was the goal.
He called it the kinematon, right?
Yeah, the kinematon.
A machine that could reproduce.
Using instructions encoded in its own structure.
It was incredibly ambitious.
He never quite finished it.
But the idea itself is mind-blowing.
It is.
Talk about playing God with machines.
It's amazing how he kept pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
It really is.
And, you know, he wasn't just this serious scientist.
Oh, yeah.
He was known for his sharp wit.
And his love of games.
Like what kind of games?
He loved poker.
No way.
Apparently he was a really good player.
I bet he was using his game theory skills at the poker table.
I'm sure he was.
There are stories about him solving complex math problems in his head while playing.
And telling jokes at the same time.
This guy was a multitasking machine.
Here's something else.
I think his love of games actually fueled his work on game theory.
He saw the world through that lens.
He did.
Seeing strategic decision-making everywhere.
In economics, politics, even our personal relationships.
Exactly.
So in a way,
he gave us a new framework
for understanding the world.
He did.
How we interact with each other.
It's a powerful way to look at things.
Speaking of powerful,
we can't forget about the final chapter of his story.
It's a sad one.
It is.
In 1955,
at the height of his career,
he was diagnosed with bone cancer.
Oh, wow.
That's heartbreaking.
How did he handle such a devastating diagnosis?
He faced it with incredible courage.
And the same intellectual curiosity he brought to everything else.
There's a story about him joking
that if he died, at least he'd leave behind a complete and consistent theory of sets.
He did have a dark sense of humor.
Even facing death, he kept his sense of humor.
It's remarkable.
But I imagine it was still incredibly difficult.
It must have been.
Despite his optimism.
The cancer progressed quickly.
It did.
He passed away in 1957.
At the age of 53.
Far too young.
What a loss.
As we reflect on his life.
What stands out to you the most?
His versatility, for sure.
And the sheer impact of his ideas.
He wasn't confined to one field.
No.
He revolutionized math, physics, economics, computer science.
It's hard to overstate his influence.
And his work is still relevant today.
More than ever.
He was truly a once-in-a-generation mind.
I agree.
But there's still more to explore.
Join us for the final part of our deep dive.
As we examine his lasting legacy.
And the profound implications of his ideas.
For the world we live in today. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the life and legacy of John von Neumann.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
From his childhood in Budapest.
To his work on everything from set theory to nuclear weapons.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around.
I know, right?
So, as we wrap things up,
what are the big takeaways from von Neumann's life?
What can we, as mere mortals,
learn from this extraordinary mind?
Well, one of the most striking things about him
was his incredible versatility.
He wasn't just a mathematician.
Right.
He's a physicist, an economist, a computer scientist.
And he excelled in all of them.
It's like he could see these connections that others just missed.
I think you're right.
He was a master at bridging the gaps between different fields.
A true polymath.
Exactly.
And that interdisciplinary approach is what allowed him to make such a huge impact.
It's a great lesson for all of us.
Don't be afraid to explore different areas.
Connect the dots between seemingly unrelated things.
You never know what amazing insights you might find.
That's the beauty of it.
Another key takeaway
is his belief in the power of abstraction.
Yeah.
He could take these incredibly complex concepts
and create these simplified models
that helped him understand the core principles.
His work on set theory and game theory are perfect examples.
Absolutely.
He took these abstract ideas
and boiled them down to their essence,
creating frameworks that are still used today
to understand logic,
strategy, decision-making.
It's remarkable.
It's like he could zoom out and see the forest for the trees.
Instead of getting lost in the details.
He was always looking for that underlying structure.
For the big picture.
Exactly.
And that kind of thinking is valuable in any field.
Whether you're solving a scientific problem,
making a business decision,
or just navigating your everyday life.
It's all about seeing the patterns.
And of course,
we can't forget about his legacy in the world of computing.
His vision for the stored program computer.
With its central processing unit.
Memory. Input-output systems.
It's literally the blueprint for almost every computer we use today.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Think about it.
Every time you use your phone,
your laptop, your smart refrigerator,
you're interacting with von Neumann's ideas.
It's mind-blowing.
He truly shaped the digital world we live in.
But his legacy isn't all sunshine and roses. His involvement in the Manhattan Project.
His views on nuclear weapons.
Those are things we need to grapple with.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that scientific progress
doesn't always lead to a better world.
There can be unintended consequences.
Ethical dilemmas that we need to face head on.
It's a heavy lesson.
It is.
But an important one.
So where does all this leave us?
What can we learn from the life and work of John von Neumann?
Well, I think his story offers several important lessons.
Okay.
First, the power of interdisciplinary thinking.
Breaking down barriers between different fields.
Exactly.
We need more people like von Neumann.
Who can see the big picture, connect the dots.
Absolutely. More people who are curious about everything.
Not afraid to explore different areas and see how they fit together.
I couldn't agree more.
Second,
his work reminds us of the power of abstraction.
Simplifying complex problems.
Creating models to help us understand the core principles.
Whether it's in science
or just our everyday lives.
It's about learning to think critically, to step back.
see the underlying structure of things.
The rules of the game, so to speak.
And finally,
I think von Neumann's story serves as a cautionary tale.
about the importance of ethics.
We can't just blindly pursue knowledge.
Without thinking about the consequences.
It's about asking tough questions.
Challenging assumptions.
Making sure our pursuit of knowledge ultimately benefits humanity.
Well said.
We need to use our intelligence wisely.
And responsibly.
So, if von Neumann were alive today...
What do you think he'd be working on?
That's a good question.
Given his incredible foresight.
He probably would have predicted all the things we're struggling with now.
I bet he would have.
I imagine he'd be fascinated by artificial intelligence.
Quantum computing.
Maybe even tackling those big questions in astrophysics and cosmology.
He always seemed to be one step ahead.
He did.
His ideas continue to shape our world.
And his legacy will undoubtedly inspire future generations.
Of scientists, mathematicians, thinkers.
I have no doubt about that.
Well, on that note,
We'll wrap up our deep dive into the extraordinary life and legacy of John von Neumann.
we hope you've enjoyed this journey.
Into the world of one of the most brilliant and influential minds of our time.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep learning.
And keep asking those big questions.
That's what von Neumann would have wanted.